Listen, I need you to understand something before we begin. What I'm about to tell you is not a conspiracy theory. It's not a bedtime story. It's not something your economics professor will teach you. Because frankly, most of them don't know it themselves. Or worse, they know it and choose to stay silent. This is the story of the greatest theft in human history. A theft so sophisticated, so elegant, so perfectly disguised that the victims defend their attackers. And you? Yes, you, listening right now, you are one of those victims. But not for much longer, because today, everything changes. If you had been standing on the platform of the railway station in Hoboken, New Jersey that evening, you would have seen something strange. You would have seen a group of men who looked far too wealthy to be skulking around in the shadows, hurrying toward a private train car. They were carrying shotguns. They were dressed in heavy canvas coats and hunting caps. To any casual observer, they looked like a group of rich friends heading south for a duck hunt. But if you looked closer, you might have recognized them. And if you recognized them, you would have been terrified. The date was November 22nd, 1910. One was Frank Vanderlip, the president of the National City Bank of New York, the most powerful bank in America. Another was Henry Davison, the senior partner of J.P. Morgan Company. There was A. Piatt Andrew, the assistant secretary of the U.S. Treasury. And leading them was Senator Nelson Aldrich, the father-in-law of John Rockefeller Jr. and the political boss of the United States Senate. These men represented, by some estimates, 1/4 of the total wealth of the entire world, and they were not going duck hunting. They had been given strict instructions. Do not use your last names. They were told to arrive one by one. They were told to ignore reporters. If anyone asked, they were just going to a remote island off the coast of Georgia for a few days of relaxation. They boarded Senator Aldrich's private parlor car, the shades were drawn tight, and the train pulled out of the station into the darkness. For the next 9 days, these men would disappear from the face of the earth. They traveled to Jekyll Island, a private club so exclusive that it was said to control 1/6 of the world's wealth. In a clubhouse made of brick and terracotta, sitting around a large mahogany table while a storm raged outside, these competitors, men who usually tried to slit each other's throats in the market, sat down to do something unprecedented. They formed a cartel. They didn't call it a cartel, of course. They were too smart for that. They called it a banking reform. But what they wrote on that island, in secret, written on notepads with pencils, was the draft for what would become the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. They created a system that would strip the power to create money away from the people and the government and hand it over to a private corporation owned by the banks themselves. They returned to New York 9 days later and vanished into their offices. 3 years later, on December 23, 1913, 2 days before Christmas, when most of Congress had already gone home to their families, the Federal Reserve Act was voted into law. The world changed that night in Hoboken, but nobody knew it. And this is why you are poor. This is why no matter how hard you work, your savings seem to buy less every year. This is why houses that cost $30,000 in your grandfather's time cost $600,000 today. This is why the rich get richer while the middle class evaporates. You are playing a game, but you are playing it with a set of rules that were written in secret on an island by the people you are playing against. Today, we are going to burn that rulebook. We are going to open the doors of the Jekyll Island Club and show you exactly what they created. We are going to explain the Mandrake Mechanism, the magical way money is created out of thin air. This is the story of how money really works. And I promise you, once you hear this, you will never look at a dollar bill the same way again. Let's start with a simple question. Where does money come from? If you ask a child, they'll say the bank. If you ask an adult, they might say the government prints it. Both of them are wrong. Here is the reality, and it is so absurd, so defying of logic, that Henry Ford once said, "It is well enough that people of the nation do not understand our banking and monetary system, for if they did, I believe there would be a revolution before tomorrow morning." Here is the mechanism. It starts when the government, politicians, decide they want to spend money they don't have. Maybe they want to fight a war. Maybe they want to send stimulus checks. Maybe they want to build a bridge. It doesn't matter. They need billions. But they don't have billions. So do they raise your taxes? No. Raising taxes is unpopular. You get voted out of office if you raise taxes. So instead, they use the magic trick. Step 1. The U.S. Treasury creates a bond. Now, a bond sounds fancy, but it's just a piece of paper. It's an IOU. In simple words, it says, if you give me money today, I will pay you back later with interest. The government prints $1 billion worth of these fancy IOUs. Step 2, the Federal Reserve steps in. The Federal Reserve is the central bank of the United States. Despite its name, it is not federal, it has stockholders, and it has no reserves. We'll get to that. The Federal Reserve says, we will buy those bonds. But wait, where does the Federal Reserve get the money to buy the bonds? Does it have a vault full of gold? No. Does it collect taxes? No.
The Federal Reserve writes a check. They write a check to the U.S. Treasury for $1 billion. Now, here is the magic. When you or I write a check, there must be money in our account to cover it. If I write a check for $1 billion, I go to jail for fraud. But when the Federal Reserve writes a check, there is no money in the account. They simply type numbers into a computer. Click, click, click. And suddenly, the account balance is $1 billion. The money is created at the moment the check is written. It is created out of nothing. It is a digital hallucination. Simply put, they conjure money from thin air, like a magician pulling a rabbit from an empty hat. Step 3, the swap. The government gives the bonds to the Fed. The Fed gives the check to the government. The government deposits this check, and suddenly the government can write checks to defense contractors, government employees, and social programs. The magic trick is complete. The politicians get to spend money they didn't have to tax you for. The bankers get to collect interest on the bonds they bought with money they created out of thin air. But wait, it gets worse, because that money, that new $1 billion, it eventually lands in a commercial bank. Let's say the government pays a defense contractor, Lockheed Martin. Lockheed Martin takes that $1 billion check and deposits it into their bank, let's say Chase Bank. Now Chase Bank has $1 billion in new deposits. You might think that money sits in the vault for safekeeping. Wrong. This is where fractional reserve banking kicks in. In our parlance, fractional reserve banking is the practice where banks only keep a small fraction of the money you deposit and loan out the rest. The rules say the bank only has to keep a fraction of that money in reserve. Usually it's about 10%. So Chase Bank keeps $100 million in the vault. And what do they do with the other $900 million? They loan it out. They loan it to you for a mortgage. They loan it to a business to start a factory. But wait a second. If Lockheed Martin thinks they have $1 billion in their account, and the person who got the mortgage thinks they have $900 million in their hands, the bank just created $900 million of new money. And then the person who sold the house takes that $900 million and deposits it into their bank. And that bank keeps 10%, $90 million, and loans out the rest, $810 million. This cycle repeats and repeats and repeats. By the time it's done, that original $1 billion created by the Fed has been multiplied into $10 billion of new money circulating in the economy. Where did this wealth come from? Did we mine more gold? No. Did we produce more wheat? No. Did we build more factories? No. We just typed numbers. You might be asking, so what? Who cares if they print money? It makes the economy grow, right? Well, ask yourself this. If you are playing Monopoly and suddenly the banker grabs a pen and writes an extra zero on everyone's money, does anyone actually get richer? No. The prices of the hotels on Boardwalk just go up. This is the hidden tax. This is the crime. We need to redefine a word you use every day: inflation. When you turn on the news, they tell you inflation is up because of supply chains, or inflation is up because of greedy corporations, or inflation is up because of Putin. They are lying to you. Milton Friedman, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, said it best. Inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. Inflation is not prices going up. Inflation is the value of your money going down. Think of the economy like a pool of soup. The money is the soup. The goods and services, cars, houses, bread, haircuts, are the croutons floating in the soup. If the government pours huge buckets of water, printed money, into the soup gets watery. You need more soup to get the same amount of nutrition. The price of the house didn't go up. The house is the same house. It has the same roof, the same bricks, but the dollar you are using to buy it got weaker, so you need more of them to buy the house. Why is this a crime? Because the people who print the money get to spend it before the inflation happens. This is called the Cantillon effect. It's named after Richard Cantillon, an 18th century French banker. He noticed something. When the king printed money, he gave it to his friends first. They bought land and castles at the old prices, but as that money circulated through the economy, prices started to rise. By the time the money reached the peasant in the field, the price of bread had doubled, but the peasant's wages hadn't. The money printers steal the value from your savings. If you have $10,000 in a savings account and the government prints 10% more money, they just stole 10% of your purchasing power. They didn't break into your house, they didn't point a gun at you, but the robbery was just as real. In 1913, when the Federal Reserve was created, you could buy a nice pair of leather shoes for $3. Today, those shoes cost $200. Did leather get harder to find? No. Did shoemaking technology get worse? No. It got better. Shoes should be cheaper. The only reason they are more expensive is because the dollar has lost 97% of its value since the men on Jekyll Island created the Fed. They have stolen 97% of your labor, 97% of your time, and you thanked them for it because the stock market went up. But here's what they don't tell you. The stock market going up is not the same as you getting richer. Let me explain. Imagine you own a house worth $100,000. Tomorrow, the government prints trillions of new dollars. Your house is now worth $200,000. Are you richer? No, because everything else doubled too. The bread, the milk, the car, the college tuition. You have more numbers in your bank account, but you can't buy more things. This is the illusion they've trapped you in. Now let's talk about debt, because this system doesn't just steal your present, it steals your future. The United States government is currently $34 trillion in debt. Trillion with a T. That number is so big it's meaningless to most people. So let me make it real. If you spent $1 million every single day since Jesus Christ was born, you still wouldn't have spent $1 trillion, and the U.S. government owes 34 of those. Who do they owe this money to? To the Federal Reserve, to the banks, to foreign governments who bought U.S. Treasury bonds, but mostly to themselves, because they keep printing new money to pay the interest on the old money. It's a Ponzi scheme. In simple words, a Ponzi scheme is a fraud where you pay old investors with money from new investors instead of actual profits. The whole thing collapses when you can't find enough new investors, and that's exactly what the U.S. government is doing. They are paying yesterday's debts with tomorrow's printed money. And here's the part that should make your blood boil. You are responsible for that debt, not the politicians who spent it, not the bankers who created it. You. Every child born in America today is born $34 trillion in debt. They owe $100,000 before they take their first breath, before they open their eyes, before they cry. They are in debt. Debt they didn't sign up for, debt they didn't benefit from, debt that was created by people who will be dead before the bill comes due. This is generational theft. This is violence, not the kind with guns and bombs, the kind with pens and papers and polite men in suits sitting in marble buildings making decisions that will enslave your children's children. And they call it fiscal policy. They call it economic stimulus. They call it saving the economy. I call it exactly what it is, robbery. Let me tell you a story. In Weimar Germany, after World War I, the government owed massive debts, war reparations, rebuilding costs. So they did what governments always do. They printed money, and they printed more money, and they printed more money. At first, people were happy. Look, the government is giving us cash. We can buy things. But then the prices started rising. A loaf of bread that cost 1 mark in 1921 cost 100 billion marks in 1923. Workers were paid twice a day, because if they waited until evening, the money would be worthless. People brought wheelbarrows full of cash just to buy groceries. Children used stacks of money as building blocks, because the paper was more valuable as toys than as currency. Life savings vanished overnight. A man who worked 40 years and saved diligently for retirement woke up one morning to find his entire life's work could buy 1 loaf of bread. The middle class was destroyed. And you know what happened next? The people were so desperate, so broken, so angry that they welcomed anyone who promised stability, anyone who promised order, even a monster, even Hitler. I'm not saying we're in Weimar Germany, not yet, but the mechanism is the same. The game is the same. The only difference is the speed. They learned from Weimar. They learned that if you boil the frog slowly, it doesn't jump out of the pot. So they print slowly. They inflate slowly. They steal slowly. Slow enough that you don't notice. Slow enough that you blame other things. You blame your boss for not paying you enough. You blame corporations for being greedy. You blame immigrants for taking jobs. You blame everything except the actual thieves, the ones sitting in that building with the columns and the marble floors, the Federal Reserve.
Now, I know what some of you are thinking. But we need the Federal Reserve. We need someone to manage the economy. Without them, we'd have chaos, crashes, depressions. Really? Let me ask you something. Before 1913, before the Federal Reserve existed, did America have an economy? Yes. Was it growing? Yes. In fact, from 1860 to 1913, America went from an agricultural backwater to the richest nation on earth. We built railroads, we built factories, we built cities, we invented the light bulb, the telephone, the airplane. We did all of that without a central bank. But you know what we didn't have? We didn't have the Great Depression. Oh wait, yes we did. And when did that happen? 1929, 16 years after the Federal Reserve was created. The Fed was supposed to prevent depressions. Instead, it caused the worst one in history. We didn't have constant wars costing trillions of dollars because before the Fed, the government couldn't just print money to fund wars. They had to ask the people for money, and the people said no. But after 1913, the government didn't need your permission anymore. They could just print the money and send your sons to die in foreign lands. World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, all funded with printed money, all paid for with your stolen wealth. We didn't have a national debt of $34 trillion. In 1913, the national debt was less than $3 billion. Today, it's $34 trillion. That's an increase of over 10,000%. And every single dollar of that debt is money that was created out of nothing and loaned to the government at interest by private banks. So when someone tells you we need the Federal Reserve, what they're really saying is we need someone to keep stealing from us. We need someone to keep us enslaved. We need someone to keep printing money so politicians can keep spending and bankers can keep collecting interest and we can keep pretending everything is fine while our children inherit an economic wasteland. I reject that completely. Now let's talk about what money actually is, because once you understand this, the whole scam falls apart. Money is not paper. Money is not gold. Money is not even Bitcoin, although we'll get to that. Money is a technology. It's a tool for storing value and exchanging it across time and space. In simple words, money is a way to trade your work today for someone else's work tomorrow. That's it. If you're a farmer and you grow tomatoes, but you need shoes, money allows you to sell your tomatoes, store that value, and later buy shoes from the shoemaker. Without money, you'd have to trade tomatoes directly for shoes. And what if the shoemaker doesn't want tomatoes? You're stuck. So money solves this problem. But money only works if it holds its value. If I sell you my tomatoes for $10 today, I need to know that $10 will still buy me a meal tomorrow. If the value of that $10 drops by half overnight, the system breaks. I've been robbed. And that's exactly what inflation does. It robs you slowly. Every year, your money is worth a little less. Every year, you need a little more of it to buy the same things. And the worst part is, they tell you it's normal. They tell you 2% inflation is healthy. 2% inflation is the target. Let me translate that for you. 2% inflation means the Federal Reserve plans to steal 2% of your wealth every single year, forever. That's the target. Not zero theft, not protecting your savings. 2% theft per year, and you're supposed to be grateful because it could be worse. That's like a thief breaking into your house and stealing only 2% of your stuff every year and expecting you to thank him because he didn't take everything. Now here's where it gets even sinister. That 2% is a lie. The way they calculate inflation is rigged. They use something called the Consumer Price Index, CPI. The CPI measures the price of a basket of goods, food, housing, healthcare, transportation, but they keep changing what's in the basket. If steak gets too expensive, they replace it with chicken. If chicken gets too expensive, they replace it with beans. They call this substitution. I call it cheating. They're measuring your declining standard of living and calling it stable prices. And even with all that cheating, all that manipulation, all that massaging of numbers, official inflation has been over 7% in recent years. The real inflation, the kind you feel when you go to the grocery store or pay your rent, is much higher. Some economists estimate real inflation is closer to 15%. 15% of your wealth stolen every single year, and they tell you it's 2%. They look you in the eye and lie. Let's talk about your salary. You think you got a raise last year? You got a 3% raise and you felt good about it. Your boss patted you on the back. You celebrated. But if inflation was 7%, you actually got a 4% pay cut. You're working the same hours, doing the same work, but you can afford less. You got poorer. And you thanked your boss for it. This is the game. This is how they keep you on the treadmill, running faster and faster, but never getting anywhere. You work harder, you get promoted, you make more money, but it doesn't matter because they're devaluing the money faster than you can earn it. You're running uphill on a treadmill that keeps speeding up, and at the top of that hill, at the finish line, there's nothing, just more treadmill, more running. Until you're too old to run and you realize you spent your entire life chasing something that was always moving away from you. Now let's talk about assets, because this is how the rich escape the trap. The rich don't keep their wealth in cash. They know cash is trash. They know it's being devalued. So they buy assets, real estate, stocks, businesses, art, gold, anything that holds value better than paper money. And when the Fed prints trillions of new dollars, where does that money go? It goes into assets. The stock market goes up, real estate goes up, art goes up. And who owns those assets? The rich. So the rich get richer while your savings account loses value. This is the Cantillon effect again. The people closest to the money printer benefit first. They get to buy assets before prices rise. By the time the new money reaches you, the assets are already expensive. You can't afford them anymore. You are priced out of home ownership, out of investing, out of building wealth. You're stuck renting, stuck working, stuck in debt while they own everything. And they tell you it's because you don't work hard enough. You need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You need to budget better. You need to make better choices.
No, the system is rigged.
Your hard work doesn't matter when the rules are designed to transfer wealth from the bottom to the top, from you to them. Let me give you numbers. In 1970, the median home price in the United States was $23,000. The median household income was $9,000. So the average home cost about 2.5 times the average yearly income. Today, the median home price is $400,000. The median household income is $70,000. So the average home costs almost 6 times the average yearly income. It's twice as hard to buy a home today as it was in 1970. Not because homes are better, not because there are fewer homes, but because they printed so much money that the value of the dollar collapsed. Your grandfather could buy a house with a few years of savings. You need a 30-year mortgage, and even that's barely affordable. And they tell you this is progress. This is economic growth. This is the American dream. It's a nightmare. Let's talk about education. In 1970, the average cost of college tuition was $500 per year. Today, it's over $30,000 per year. That's a 6,000% increase. Did the quality of education improve by 6,000%? No. Did professors get paid 6,000% more? No. Did the buildings get 6,000% better? No. The only thing that changed is they printed more money. And colleges, knowing students could borrow unlimited amounts through government-backed loans, raised their prices to capture that printed money. So now you have an entire generation buried in student debt, debt that can't be discharged in bankruptcy, debt that follows them until they die, debt for a degree that often doesn't even lead to a good job. This is indentured servitude. This is slavery with extra steps. You sign up at 18 years old, before your brain is fully developed, before you understand what you're agreeing to, and you spend the next 30 years paying it off. 30 years of your life, your youth, your energy, your potential, handed over to the banks who created the money out of nothing and loaned it to you at interest. Do you see it now? Do you see the machine? It's not just about inflation, it's about control. It's about keeping you dependent, keeping you working, keeping you distracted, afraid to quit your job because you have debt, afraid to take risks because you have bills, afraid to speak up because you might lose your income. This is the purpose of the system, not to help you prosper, but to keep you productive, keep you obedient, keep you in your place. And if you start to wake up, if you start to question, they have another tool. They crash the economy. They call it a recession, a correction, a necessary adjustment, but it's not natural. It's engineered. The boom and bust cycle is not a feature of free markets. It's a feature of central banking. They print money, creating a boom. Asset prices rise, everyone feels rich, they borrow more, spend more, then the Fed raises interest rates, they make borrowing expensive, businesses can't afford loans, they lay off workers, stock market crashes, real estate crashes. And who suffers? You. You lose your job, you lose your home, you lose your savings. But the rich, the ones with inside information, they see it coming. They sell their assets at the top, they hold cash, they wait for the crash. Then they buy everything back at bargain prices. This happened in 2008. The banks made risky bets, created a housing bubble, then the bubble popped. Millions of people lost their homes, lost their jobs, lost their retirement savings. And what happened to the banks? They got bailed out. The government, using your tax money and printed money, gave the banks trillions of dollars, rewarded them for crashing the economy. And the executives at those banks, they paid themselves bonuses with your money. This is not capitalism. Capitalism is when you take risks and you succeed or fail based on those risks. This is corporatism. This is crony capitalism. This is socialism for the rich and brutal capitalism for everyone else. The banks get bailouts, you get bootstraps. So what do? How do we escape this system? How do we protect ourselves? First, understand that you cannot fix this system from within. You cannot vote your way out. Both political parties support the Fed. Both parties support printing money.
because printing money allows them to spend without taxing, allows them to buy votes, allows them to fund wars and programs and subsidies without facing the consequences. They get the benefits, you get the bill. So voting harder won't save you. Second, protect your wealth by moving it out of cash. I'm not giving financial advice, I'm not qualified for that, but I'm telling you what the rich do. They buy assets, real estate if you can afford it, stocks, though be careful because the market is manipulated too, gold, which has held value for thousands of years, silver, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, though that's a whole other conversation about decentralized money that governments can't print. The point is, don't keep your wealth in dollars. Don't trust the system that's designed to rob you. Third, reduce your dependence on the system. Get out of debt as fast as possible. Debt is slavery. The borrower is slave to the lender. Every dollar you owe is a dollar of power they have over you. Pay it off. Live below your means. Stop consuming garbage you don't need. Stop trying to impress people who don't care about you. Build skills, real skills that have value, skills that can't be automated or outsourced. Learn to create value for others. Start a business. Build something. Own something. Because ownership is freedom. As long as you're just an employee, you're dependent. You're one layoff away from disaster. Fourth, educate yourself. Read, learn, understand how the system works so they can't trick you. Read books about money, about economics, about history, because this isn't new. This has happened before. Every empire that debased its currency collapsed. Rome, Spain, France, Germany, every single one. And America is on that same path. The only question is when, and whether you'll be prepared when it happens. Fifth, build community. Because when the system fails, and it will fail, the people who survive are the ones with relationships, with networks, with trust. Money is just paper. Real wealth is people, is skills, is knowledge, is land, is food, is water, is relationships. Focus on those things. Finally, teach your children. Don't let them go through the same indoctrination you went through. Don't let them spend 12 years in school learning nothing about money, nothing about taxes, nothing about debt, nothing about how the system actually works. Teach them, show them, give them the tools to escape the trap that caught you. This is how we fight back. Not with violence, not with revolution, but with knowledge, with preparation, with independence. We starve the beast by refusing to feed it. We opt out. We build parallel systems. We take back our power one person at a time. And maybe, just maybe, we leave our children a world that's a little bit freer than the one we inherited. The men on Jekyll Island in 1910 thought they were building something permanent. They thought they were creating a system that would last forever. They were wrong. Every system built on lies eventually collapses under the weight of its own contradictions. Every empire that steals from its people eventually faces the consequences. The only question is whether we'll be ready when it happens, whether we'll have positioned ourselves to survive and thrive, or whether we'll go down with the ship, clutching our worthless dollars, wondering what went wrong. The choice is yours. The system will continue to lie to you, continue to steal from you, continue to tell you everything is fine while the house burns around you. But now you know. Now you see. Now you understand why your grandfather could buy a house with 2 years of savings and you can't buy one with 20 years of debt. Now you understand that the rich get richer and you work harder but never get ahead. Now you understand that it's not your fault. It's not because you're lazy or stupid or unlucky. It's because the game is rigged. The deck is stacked. The house always wins, unless you stop playing their game and start playing your own. So take this knowledge, use it, share it, because the greatest weapon they have is your ignorance, your compliance, your belief that this is just how things are. It's not. It doesn't have to be. We can build something better, something fair, something honest, but first we have to see the prison we're in. We have to acknowledge that these bars are real, even though they're invisible. We have to stop defending our captors and start planning our escape. The door is open.
You just have to walk through it. Will you?